For this video, we're going to discuss multiplication and division of real numbers. And before we dive into some of the fractions and decimals and things that you'll see, I want to remind you of the rules for multiplying and dividing integers. So I'm going to do one video for topics 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so I find that students tend to remember multiplying and dividing integer rules a lot easier. So just to remind you, for multiplying integers, if you're multiplying integers that have the same sign, you're going to get a positive product. So if you multiply two positives, the result is positive. If you multiply two negatives, the result is also positive. If you multiply two integers with different signs, you're always going to get a negative product. So a negative times a positive or a positive times a negative, you're going to get that negative product. And I gave you two quick examples. So if I have negative 5 times negative 4, multiplying two negatives, so we know 5 times 4 is 20, and it's just going to remain positive. And then 7 times negative 3, we're multiplying integers with different signs. So I know that 7 times 3 is 21, and in this case, it's going to stay negative, okay? So let's look at two examples. So example 1, two parts. So example 1 says find each product. Part A, we have negative 36 times 4. So we're multiplying two numbers. They have different signs. That means that the final product is going to be negative, okay? And then as for what that product is, you can certainly use your calculator, but at some point I do want you to practice doing some of this stuff by hand, because sometimes the time it takes you to stop what you're doing on paper and then move over to your calculator, you can lose your rhythm and you end up making mistakes. So there are situations where knowing how to do quick calculations by hand is going to just be easier and quicker. So let's practice multiplying. So I have 36 times 4. I'm going to start with the 4 that's in the ones place. I'm going to multiply it by the 6 in the 36. 4 times 6 is 24. So I keep the 4 and I carry the 2. Okay. So then I want to take the 4 times the 3. 4 times 3 is 12. And then I want to add the 2 that I carried. So 12 plus 2 is 14. That tells me that this product is negative 144. So negative 36 times positive 4 is negative 144. All right, looking at part B, you can see that we're multiplying two integers that are both negatives. They have the same sign. That means the final result will be positive. Okay, so keep that in mind. Always double and triple check those signs. We'll address that again at the end. But for now, let's do the multiplication. I have 87 times 5. I'm going to start with the 5. I'm going to multiply it by the digit in the ones place, which is the 7. So 5 times 7 is 35. So I keep the 5. I carry the 3. And then 5 times 8 is 40. Add the 3 that you carried, and you get 443. So the final answer here is 435. And just double check your signs. We're multiplying two numbers that are negative. When we multiply two negatives, that becomes a positive product. So this answer would be positive 435. So just remind yourself of the rules for multiplying integers. Now, luckily, the rules for dividing integers are exactly the same. So topic 2, dividing integers. When you're dividing two integers that have the same sign, you're going to get a positive product. So a positive divided by a positive is a positive, and a negative divided by a negative is also positive. I gave you a quick example of negative 20 divided by negative 5. Because I'm dividing two negatives, the quotient's going to be positive, in this case, positive 4. If you're dividing two numbers with different signs, you're always going to get a negative product. So a negative divided by a positive is negative. A positive divided by a negative is also negative. And a quick example, 36 divided by 9, or negative 36 divided by 9 is going to be negative 4. All right, so example 2 says find each quotient. These you can kind of do in your head. There's not really any side work here. So positive 42 divided by 7 is going to be negative. And then you have to remind yourself, what do I multiply 7 by to get 42? Well, that would be 6. So 42 divided by 7 is 6. And in this case, positive 42 divided by negative 7 is negative 6. Now for part B, we're dividing two negatives. So that means the final result would be positive. And then you have to ask yourself, what would I multiply 12 by to get 36? Well, 12 times 3 is 36, which means 36 divided by 12 is 3. And in this case, remember, it's going to be positive 3. So there you have it. Hopefully that's a nice reminder of how the rules work for multiplying and dividing integers. So lastly, let's look at multiplying a series of integers. Okay, so you'll find yourself in situations where you have to multiply 2, 3, 4, 5 integers. Okay, so it's not always just two integers that you're multiplying. And if you do have a series of integers with a series of a mix of positives and negatives, there's a rule that you can remember. If you have an even number of negatives, you're going to get a positive product. If you have an odd number of negatives, you're going to get a negative product, okay? And that should make sense. If you have an even number of negatives, all of the negatives pair up and each pair of negatives becomes positive, which gives you a positive product. If you have an odd number of negatives, all of the negatives pair up except for one. So those pairs of negatives become positive, but you have that one leftover negative that's going to make your whole product negative. So let's look and see what we have for example 3. It says find each product. So what I like to do is I like to go through and just count the negatives first. So for part A, I have 1, 2, I have 3 negative integers. Because that's an odd number, 2 of those negatives are going to pair up to become a positive. But then that last negative integer is just going to keep the whole product negative. So I'm going to get negative something. And then as for how you would multiply here, you can multiply 2 by 2, you can multiply from left to right, whatever works for you. Just make sure all of the integers are part of the product. So I'm going to do 2 by 2. All right, so we have 1 times 5. Okay, so that's going to be 5. And remember, we already know that the product's going to be negative, but if you want proof, again, -1 times -5 is going to be +5. We then have 4 times 2, which is 8, but we have +4 times -2, which is -8. And finally, at the end, we have a positive times a negative, which does give us that negative product we were expecting. And 5 times 8 is 40. So the final product is -40. Okay? For part B, let's count the negatives again. I have 1, 2 negative integers. 2 is an even number, so this is going to have a positive product, but we can prove it to ourselves. We can multiply 2 by 2 again. Okay? So 3 times -7 is going to be negative, and then 3 times 7 is 21. And then 2 times 4 is 8, but this time we have 2 times -4, which is -8. So you can see here at the end, we're multiplying 2 negatives, which just verifies that we're going to have a positive product. And then let's see what 21 times 8 gives us. Well, when I go to do the side work, I get 8 times 1 is 8, and then 8 times 2 is 16. So we should get positive 168. Okay, so hopefully this was a quick reminder of the rules for multiplying and dividing integers. Make sure you practice this a bit, because if you can practice and get really successful with just multiplying and dividing integers, it'll make it a lot easier when you start to incorporate fractions and decimals. All right.